Hey there, folks. This is Jay Frost, of course, speaking to you from the Philanthropy Mastermind series. So glad you could make it back today. We are very happy to have you and joining us for yet another week where we have two sessions and another podcast. So if you're not following all that, you can learn more about it at the DonorSearch site, which is at donorsearch.net, where you can also be on the list to learn about all the sessions we have coming up every single week this year. And you can also, if you wish, learn a little bit more about all those donors who make your work possible. You can do all that at DonorSearch, again, donorsearch.net. We won't be talking much about them today unless our guest mentions them for some reason. But again, you can learn all about it there. And now I also want to make sure that you know that this is a space where even though you're going to be learning quite a bit today, and I will make myself invisible so that you can really take advantage of that and of our guest presenter, we want you to be engaged in this. So we will be monitoring the chat and Q&A closely throughout and probably popping in occasionally if there are some questions coming from all of you. But maybe to warm that space up, we would love it if you just let us know, and especially let our presenter know today, where you're coming in from, maybe which organization, which part of the country or the world. We'd love to know that. So just please do, if you would, just tell us in the chat. Thank you. Connecticut, which is my home state. You probably knew that. So thank you. And there we go. There's Andrea from Feeding Tampa Bay in Florida. And we've got someone from Akron and Memphis and Flint, Albany. Oh, wow. And Stillman College. Great. East Tennessee, Muskegon. This is quite a crowd. Thank you all so very much for doing that. Please keep that going because I know that in the background, our presenter today is taking a look at that and he's going to love to know where you're here from. And if you feel like dropping in maybe which organization you're with or any questions that come to mind throughout, feel free to use that space. Really, really great to see that. Thank you all very much for that. Of course, you probably know this already, but our guest today is Darian Rodriguez-Heyman. And if you don't know his work, well, shame on you, but you're going to know a little bit more about it when he starts to present. But I will just give you a thumbnail sketch so you can fill up your bookcase like I do mine. He is the best-selling author of at least two books, Nonprofit Management 101 and Nonprofit Fundraising 101. Those should be on your shelf or in your digital. And he's also the former executive director of the Craigslist Foundation. So he's done many things and he's doing a lot more in the future as well. Be on the lookout for a book released at the end of this year, but he might tell you about that. But with that, I'm going to step back and let him work his magic. Thank you so much for being here today, Darian. We really appreciate it. And we see your slides, but we don't hear you.
Thank you so much for having me, and great to be with all of you today. Appreciate you hosting, Jay, and very grateful to be with all of you today. My name's Darian Rodriguez-Heyman, and really excited to dive into this topic of what I see as the overlap between two of the most challenging issues that face nonprofits in this country, which are fundraising and board engagement. And in my experience, when you put the two of those together, it can be really challenging. And so that will be our focus today. As Jay mentioned, I want to keep this conversational. And so we're going to go through quite a bit of content, and I'm going to pause at multiple points in the presentation. So if you have any questions about how any of this stuff applies to you and your organization, if anything's not clear, then by all means, please use the chat, and I'll pause at multiple points, not just at the end, to respond to some of those questions. I've also got my personal email here, and I'll have my personal mobile phone on the last slide. And I invite any and all of you to get in touch with me if I can be of service whenever I do keynotes or present webinars or write books. I always invite anybody that's in the audience to reach out to me and contact me if they're interested in sitting down for 15, 20 minutes pro bono and basically just chatting about their organization, their goals, and hopefully helping them address some obstacles that are impeding their social impact. That's my work in the world, is helping people help. So let's dive into it. And let me start by speaking to probably what I think of as the question we don't often ask ourselves enough in the nonprofit world, which is, what does success look like? And in my mind, if you leave this next hour talk inspired, then that's great, but it actually means I haven't done my job, because my job is to leave you not only inspired, but inspired to action, meaning what can you do differently an hour from now that's going to put you in a better position to advance your work and serve your cause. That's really why we're here. So you heard a little bit about my background from Jay. I am the former executive director at Craigslist Foundation, where I started their nonprofit boot camp. That was really what gave me my life's purpose around helping people help, and it's the work I've been doing for 25 years since. Done a lot of work in the gender equality space, both on the impact investing side, having started something called Gender Smart, and with the United Nations around creating the SDGs for both gender and climate. But really, my focus in general over the last 25 years has been on creating and sharing and disseminating, helping to implement tactical, practical tips and tools for social impact. Do this, don't do that. Here's how to. Very concrete information. I've done that as a grant maker. I've done that as an executive director, as a board chair, and more recently as a philanthropic advisor. I saw some folks from Akron and elsewhere in Ohio, and I got to help work in Dayton, Ohio, distributing $20 million of grants to frontline organizations advancing racial equity, putting into practice a lot of the things that as a fundraiser, I wish funders would do more of. Really great experience there. I've also written a couple books, as Jay mentioned, Nonprofit Fundraising and Nonprofit Management 101, both of which were bestsellers and both of which are super practical and really comprehensive guides to all different aspects of helping your nonprofit with fundraising and with management. Right now, I'm working on a book for AI for Good and how nonprofits can use AI as a tool for fundraising to streamline programs, et cetera. So let's dive in. And, one quick story that I kind of need to tell you all before we dive into the meat and potatoes here. And it's a story that I never like to talk about fundraising without sharing this story, because to me, it really illuminates what I see as the single greatest challenge or obstacle impeding us from raising vastly more money, but at the same time feeling even better about it and leaving our donors feeling better about it. And that obstacle, that challenge, as I see it, is sort of this begging for alms approach to fundraising, this tin cup approach to fundraising that all too often, when we're raising money for a really important cause, we feel a sense of shame, or we feel a sense of sort of, this begging mentality. And in my experience, that doesn't work. It doesn't feel good. It doesn't leave donors feeling good. And ultimately, it's rooted in a failure perception that is best illuminated through this really short story. Because it's a short story of a young man who'd go on to become a renowned philanthropist and celebrity. But as he was younger, he was actually the first in his family to make it through not only undergraduate, but he went on to get a master's degree. And while he was in, his master's course, he was in a 2 hour long class with 150 master's and doctorate students, a philosophy class. And one day, the philosophy professor got in front of this big auditorium and said, "Class, is this glass half full or half empty?" And, it's a philosophy class. So as you might imagine, these 200 students talked in circles for an hour and a half, and they did not solve the age-old riddle. And this young man, whose family had made a huge amount of sacrifices to put him through not only undergraduate, but now graduate program, was incredibly frustrated. He felt like there were all these high-powered and high-paying students wasting an hour and a half of time talking in circles. So he walks home, he's huffing and puffing his way through the streets, and he gets home, and his grandmother Gertrude is there waiting for him, and she says what grandmas typically say: "How was class today?" "Nah, I don't want to talk about it." He blows her off. But she presses him, as grandmothers are prone to do. "No, really, I want to know, how was class today?" And he says, "Well, if you really got to know, Grandma, it was incredibly frustrating. We had 150 masters and doctorate students sitting around for 2 hours debating if the glass were half full or half empty." And his grandma, with all of a second grade education, mind you, without missing a beat, says, "Oh, well, that's easy. It depends on whether you're pouring or drinking." Pouring or drinking. And the point here is that when you take this begging for alms approach to fundraising, like I said, it's rooted in a failure perception. And that specifically, that is this notion that because we rely on the charitable contributions of people and organizations to do our good work, that somehow makes us the drinkers. But ultimately, the point I want to leave you with as we get started today is nothing could be further from the truth. We, all of you, every nonprofit that's part of a global movement with a capital M, we are not the drinkers, we are the pourers. We are the nurturers of society. And fundamentally, what we all do is we are conduits, we are channels for impact, and we connect people and organizations with resources to the change they want to see in the world. And that's change they probably could not have affected on their own. And to me, That is a privilege. It is holy work. And we need to hold our heads high as we do this work. And it's like throwing a party. It's not an ask, it's an invitation. We're climbing this hill anyway. Who's with us? And if you are, great. We're aligned and it should happen organically and easily. And if you're not, that needs to be okay too. If it doesn't feel right when someone says no, then you're not doing it right when it comes to fundraising. So, let's remember that we are the porters, we are the nurturers, and that ultimately, as one of my mentors and fundraising sheroes likes to say, K Sprinkle Grace, people don't give to you, they give through you. Again, we're a channel for impact. You're not raising money for yourself or even your organization. It's those kids, those homeless, those seniors that you serve. All right, so let's get into it. And specifically, I want to spend just a minute talking about why we're here and why is this topic of getting your board more engaged in fundraising so important. You're already taking time out of your busy schedule, so I don't need to belabor the point. And what I really want to focus on are those top tips and tools, the how-tos, do this, don't do that, and giving you some really tactical tips of how to actually raise more money in partnership with your board and make them feel better about it. Really quickly, why is this such a big issue? Well, it's been 20 years now that I've been looking at the Daring to Lead study from Compass Point, Meyer Foundation, and Haas here in San Francisco. And what they found in 2004 originally was that fully, more than half of executive directors are leaving their jobs and leaving the sector within 5 or 10 years. Right. So we have a leaky pipeline. And when you dig down and look at why are people leaving the space, what you find is at the top of every survey is frustrations and struggles around fundraising. And then second, right behind that is almost always challenges with their board. And like I said at the beginning, when you look at the overlap between those two issues and the topic of getting your board more involved with fundraising, that could be especially perplexing to many nonprofits. I've helped hundreds of nonprofits sort of navigate through those challenges. And in the process, I found a few tools that tend to be helpful to the vast majority of them. And that's really going to be our focus today. Why is this important and when is this important? Well, what I've seen over and over again, because I've done a lot of work with grassroots organizations, community-led, small, under a couple $1 million budget that are lucky enough to grow, right? What most nonprofit leaders don't recognize is more than half of the nonprofits in this country, there's about 1.8 million of us, more than half of us have budgets underneath 100 grand. No paid staff, no real budgets. No, and they're just doing the good work. And so what oftentimes happen is somebody runs out, wants to start a nonprofit. The IRS tells them they need at least a couple other board members beside themselves, and they kind of mobilize some friends, some contacts for sort of an in-name only board, like a rubber stamp board where I'm not really expecting you to do anything. I just need you to sign these papers, right? That happens far too often. Most of the nonprofits that are sort of past that 100K, ceiling, where now we're getting to be more of a professional organization. We have paid staff. We're really, a sustained effort. In those early days, it's really common to have what's called a working board, where they essentially function as an extension of the staff because we don't have enough paid bodies in place to do the work. And so the board helps to fill in. Where I find the biggest challenges is once you punch through the $2 million ceiling, now we're getting to be more of a professional organization and we're not chronically under-resourced. The mission is inevitably still much bigger than we can achieve with our limited resources and team, but at least we're in a position to be a professional and sustained organization. And now what we want from our board is something a little bit different, where instead of just being an extension of our staff, we're looking for generative and strategic leadership. We're looking for the board to help craft our vision and our programs, and then help marshal the resources needed to execute against those goals. That's fundraising. And when you try to get a board to move and transition from being a working board to a fundraising, a strategic, a governing board, that transition can be really challenging. And the last thing you want is to disrespect the people that helped get you to that point by saying, hey, our needs have changed and thanks for your service, goodbye. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. It needs to be a graceful transition that is rooted in, thank you so much for your tireless work and leadership. Because of you, we're now at this exciting inflection point. And as we enter this exciting next chapter of our development and impact, which is only possible because of your support, Does it make sense for us to revisit the highest and the best purpose of the board? How do we make the best use of your time? How do we make sure you have access to the right information to make the best decisions, and really help to move our work forward? And that's the conversation that I think is at the core of setting the stage for the tools we're going to talk about today. Why is this so critical as it relates to fundraising in particular? Well, one of the things that we professional fundraisers like to say is the most powerful form of ask is a peer ask, right? And that sounds like rather than me asking you to do something I have not done myself, it sounds like I invite you to join me in supporting the great work of Numi Foundation, whatever the group is. I just gave and you should too, right? So again, I'm asking you to do something I've done myself. That's part of why it's so critical that our board gives, so that it enables them to more effectively fundraise. And we'll talk a bit about give or get and those policies. So with that said, let's dive into the tactical, practical tips and tools, the here's how to and do this, don't do that kind of content. All right. One of the biggest things that I hear when I talk to boards about fundraising is, oh, I don't like fundraising. I don't like to ask people for money, right? That is by far the most common reservation that you hear from board members when they express resistance to fundraising. That the second is probably nobody ever told me that that's part of what I was supposed to do here. And there's sort of a bit of a bait and switch mentality. And we'll talk a bit about that because we do want to be upfront and explicit with folks so there's no confusion. And fundraising needs to be viewed as a core responsibility of each and every board member. The problem is most board members think of fundraising only as making the ask. And I like to say that's like saying dating is only about the proposal for marriage. It is absolutely a point of culmination, but there's a lot of work that goes into it in terms of the cultivation. There's a lot of work that comes after it in terms of the stewardship or the marriage, right? And so the idea is the first tip I want to share is staging a thankathon because it really helps to sort of viscerally help your board members wrap their head around the idea that fundraising is a process and it's about a lot more than just asking for money. And one of the easiest ways to get them to recognize this is to organize a thankathon. And quite simply, you're going to divide up your donor list. Maybe it's just the top 10 or 20 donors per board member. So you get a couple hundred a couple hundred donors that are going to receive a touch here. And you also hand out some very simple call scripts, but those call scripts sound something like, hey Jay, this is Darian from the board of Numi Foundation. I saw that you gave $100 to our annual campaign last year, and I just wanted to call to say thank you. Because of your support, we were able to launch an emergency food relief program during COVID and feed 6,000 low-income seniors and families and deliver over 500,000 pounds of food. And we launched clean and safe drinking water programs in India and in Madagascar that are today delivering clean water to more than 10,000 people on a daily basis. Couldn't have done it without you, and I just wanted to say thank you. Click, no ask, no invitation, nothing, no call to action, just gratitude. Great way to sort of make the donors feel a lot better about the organization, but also get the board members engaged in talking about the impact, which is ultimately why they're there. And what do you think is going to happen the next time you do make an ask of Jay? And there's a good chance, number one, that he's going to say yes when maybe he wouldn't have before, and number two, maybe he adds a zero. And when he does, you better believe I'm calling that board member to say, "Hey, Darian, I don't know if you remember calling Jay, but he gave us $100 last year, and he just increased his gift to $1,000. Want to just thank you for calling him and making that thankathon call. Really paid off." And all of a sudden, that board member's feeling like maybe this fundraising thing isn't so hard after all, right? Great, great tactic. And ultimately, this is one really helpful step toward the sort of golden standard here, which is that in an ideal world, a donor will receive 7 touch points between asks. This is very challenging for most nonprofits to actually fulfill and execute against. But the idea is you don't want to treat them as an ATM and only reach out when you're asking for money. That is literally the one thing that I heard. I interviewed 50 experts across all different aspects of fundraising for the Nonprofit Fundraising 101 book. And the one thing I heard in every chapter, whether it was grants or donors or corporate giving, you name it, was no one wants to be treated as an ATM. So in an ideal world, we're communicating to, say, thanks for your gift. Here's your donor acknowledgement letter. Here's an impact update. Here's a newsletter, whatever else it might be, to kind of build the relationship, the social capital, and make it more relationship versus transactional oriented, so that when you do circle back with the primary call to action of making a gift, that it's better received. Really, really great tactic to get folks there and help them really recognize that fundraising is about more than asking for money. Another super clear tactical thing that I just want to share was something that got lifted up from a report that Bloomerang put out, which said that if a first-time donor receives a thank you call from a board member within 2 days, 48 hours of their first gift to a nonprofit, their lifetime value goes up by 50%, right? So what do we do tactically speaking? Well, let's create some kind of ad hoc committee. Maybe it's a development committee if you have one. It could just be a subset of board members who are willing to kind of get the bat phone call. And anytime you get a donation above X dollars, could be 500 bucks, 100 bucks, 1,000 bucks, it's different for different groups, but a significant gift, I'm sending out an email to that ad hoc committee saying, hey guys, John Doe just donated 500 bucks. Would somebody mind giving him a call to say thank you? Hey, John, this is Darian from the board of, da, da, da. Just want to say thank you for that gift. Really appreciate the support. And please know we're going to put it to good work. That's it. Click. That lifetime value is going to go up over time. Really, really simple tactic that directly leads to more dollars in the door. So I want to dive in now to a couple of the most valuable and useful tools I've seen that relate to getting your board more involved and engaged in fundraising. And again, getting them to feel better about that. I'm going to pause just for a moment and see if Jay or any of you have any questions, that would be helpful for me to speak to before we dive into these tools.
Thank you, Darian. Yes, we had a couple things come up. One was from Alexis, and who asked, what if you don't have individual donors yet and have just existed on grants for 15 years? Is there a different phone-a-thon approach to engage the board that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, if you don't have the donor base, then you're not going to be able to call those individual givers to say thank you. I do think that for what it's worth, one of the touch points with those funders, because just like we talk about, donors don't want to be treated like an ATM, neither do foundation, program officers. And so by all means, it's probably going to be a shorter list. It probably won't be 200 donors. It might be 10 foundations, but maybe each board member takes one or two names instead of 5 to 10. And again, it's just simply saying thank you. We really appreciate the support. We know you've been with us for a couple of years, and the one thing that I would add that would be slightly different from a sort of talking point and a script, for institutional donors, there's not a lot of things you could say that are sort of truisms about fundraising, but one of the things that I've seen that 99% of the time is accurate is that fundamentally the key to success with individual donors tends to be about personal relationships and connections to the organization, and how eloquent and articulate you are with sharing the work. With institutional funders like foundations, the bottom line is it's not their money. They have a job and they have a mandate. And so the key to success with institutional giving from foundations, companies, the government is understanding their goals and priorities and helping them understand how you can help them achieve those by supporting you. And so the one talking point I would add into the script, which will be a little bit more work because it'll be different for each funder, is like the one sentence Venn diagram articulation. Bob, I really just want to thank you for your past support. We absolutely share the Packard Foundation's commitment to uplifting the most marginalized members of our population. And thanks to your support, we've been able to do that by, helping 2,000 people get back into the workforce through our vocational training program. Just want to say thanks. We couldn't have done it without you. Click. So, I would add that one Venn diagram sentence.
And then, Darian, we had one other one from
Sure.
Andrea, who had, or excuse me, Roberta, who had said that they send handwritten thank yous to their donors and wondered if that also worked.
That is a phenomenal tactic that I would absolutely encourage. And it is absolutely yet another example of how board members can support fundraising beyond just asking people for money, right? We're going to dive now into the board member agreement. And one of the things I like to say explicitly to board members in this document is if you're not comfortable asking for money, we will not force you to do so. I'll do it as the staff, another board member will do it, whatever. But the point is, you don't want that to be a barrier and an obstacle. They do need to understand that every board member must support fundraising, and it's a key responsibility. And that is really best addressed through the board member agreement. So let's dive into these tools. And first of all, let me just say that again, especially when it comes to the pain point of migrating your board from a working board to a fundraising or a strategic board, what I see is we want the board to really focus more of their time on strategy and especially on fundraising. They're used to being in the weeds and kind of helping to execute. And again, it's all about the graceful transition. So there's this overarching framing. And I would say that the messenger for this frame is not the staff. It has to either be a consultant with sort of a recognized expert third party, been around the block hat on, or a board member or group of board members who's going to relay this message to the entire board. So if you don't have access to a consultant, then the next step would be to have a private conversation with one or two board champions and essentially get them excited about these tools, this infrastructure, these interventions that I'll detail in just a second. But the idea is, you want to approach it from a standpoint of catering to their ego. And it's, as hard as this might be to hear, to the extent you make it about what the organization needs, even though that's technically and theoretically why they're there, it's not going to be as resonant and as well received in my experience. And you're going to leave them with that bait and switch, our needs have evolved. Thanks for your service, but we no longer need you. And that doesn't feel good and it's unnecessary. And it will undermine fundraising. Because when you have the conversation in the right way, I've had deadweight board members leave the board, but feel so good about it that they wrote their biggest check yet on their way out the door. That's what we want here is these graceful transitions. And in my experience, the way you frame it is, thank you so much. And this is even to a deadweight board member. Thank you so much for your hard work and your leadership, your commitment to the mission and vision and programs of our organization. And never mind the work of the staff, never mind my work as the ED. Because of your hard work and commitment, we are now at this exciting inflection point, right? And now as we look forward at this next chapter of our development and impact, the question that I'm wondering is, does it make sense to revisit what is the highest and the best purpose of the board? And as we start to get, celebrities or A-listers or CEOs onto this board and really level up our organization, we need to make sure that we are making the absolute best use of your time, especially as it relates to meetings. We need to make sure that everybody on the board, starting with the current board, but as we recruit new members, that everybody knows exactly what's expected of them and how the pieces fit together. And we need to invite a much deeper level of intentionality into recruitment so that the board and the organization senior leadership are in lockstep, in consensus at all points in time around not just, hey, we're looking for board members, anybody know anybody? But no, we're looking for a Latino accountant with good foundation connections, or we're looking for a youth development expert, that knows key influencers on social media, who, comes from the East Coast, whatever it might be. But what are those top three needs right now? And making sure we're on the same page. Does that sound like it would be helpful? Right. And if you frame it that way, and again, it's sort of catering to their ego and sort of they're so important, they're the ones that got us here, and we need to make better use of their time and set them up for more success, then inevitably they say, that sounds like a great idea. Right. And then the idea is kind of walking them through one level deeper, each of these three initial tools. Well, I just learned about a couple different tools that I think could be helpful in getting us there. First of all, having a board member agreement, which is a uniform job description that really spells out sort of what is the lowest common denominator that the board believes is reasonable to expect on an annual basis of each and every director. We're trying to, set the floor here. The hope is everybody will do more. But would it be helpful to say, here are the sort of minimum expectations, the roles and responsibilities of all board members, to set that floor? And to be really clear about what's expected and how the pieces fit together. Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Excellent. Board Matrix, super simple tool to guide recruitment and refinement and make sure that we're clear, in the long run, what do we need on this board for this group and this organization to fulfill its potential, but also use it as an asset map to take inventory and guide a conversation, a more proactive conversation in the short term about what are our recruitment needs right now. Or if we're tightening the board, what are the top needs, that we need to focus on as we refine and constrict the board? And then finally, the consent agenda, which is probably my favorite tool as an executive director and as a board chair, is, and would it be of interest for us to completely transform board meetings? Because what is typically the case in nonprofit boardrooms is we spend 90 to 100% of our time in monologue, just kind of talking at the board, giving them a series of updates, and maybe they ask some clarifying questions, and then they go home. And we haven't moved the mission forward in any way, which is ultimately why they're there. And instead, what if we were to get all of the FYIs and updates out of the way in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the board meeting? If you look at most agendas, almost every item has the word report or update on it. What if we eliminated all of those and the only items left had the words discussion, brainstorm, right? And we got into problem solving and answering the questions that we as the staff don't know the answers to before the board meeting, instead of just bringing you up to speed and using these meetings as working meetings to catapult our work and our mission and our impact forward. Would that be of interest? And basically treat you like heads of state and give you a dossier so we very quickly level you up and still get all those updates out of the way, but do it much more efficiently so we can make better use of your time and either have fewer or shorter meetings or use them for dialogue and problem solving. Oh, that sounds great, right? So if you frame it like that, it's generally really well received. And then the idea would be to have that board champion or a consultant share that same message with the larger board, because again, as hard as you work, if the staff presents these tools to the board, there's usually some pushback. There's a variety of other tools in my toolkit that I've worked with many different nonprofits on, an annual survey that sort of gauges how are we doing as a board, as an organization, and how are you performing vis-a-vis those expectations in the board member agreement, but also what are your goals for the year ahead from a fundraising and other standpoint, and what kind of support do you need from the staff and the board to get there? And then also having like really simple one-page charters for each committee, each board officer. What is the job of the secretary anyway? One sentence mission statement and a few bullet points of, tactically what are their roles and responsibilities. Again, it's about inviting more intentionality across the board. Certainly a variety of policies for confidentiality, conflicts of interest, et cetera. I have templates and examples for all of these. So if anybody wants to email me, happy to share those. I'm also happy, as I said earlier, to jump on a call for 15, 20 minutes and talk about your specific challenges and needs and talk you through how to implement some of these. But let's dive deeper into these first 3 tools, because in my experience, they are almost always, the first go-to tools that really help to transition that working board into a strategic fundraising and generative board. So, and all of these, I should say, are sort of less is more by design. These are not tools that take months and months and months to develop and implement. They're down and dirty, instantly useful, right? And you might want to spend months in the process of creating them, but the tool itself is a tip of the iceberg, a tip of the spear that allows you to focus a conversation on what really matters and forget all the nice to haves and focus on the must haves. So starting with the board member agreement, this is not something that is buried in your bylaws in pages, 483 to 497 and written in legalese and very amorphous language. This is a standalone document. It's no more than 3 pages. And it's basically just a checklist or a bullet point list of what are the minimum expectations, across everything, across, attendance for meetings and committees and number of hours financial and fundraising responsibilities, etc. Right? And just putting it on a few pieces of paper in very clear language, plain English, not, layman's terms, not legalese. And it should be really black and white, right? It shouldn't be, I agree to make a good faith effort to attend all board meetings. And then at the end of the year, I'm like, oh, well, I made it to that one meeting. That was cool. And you're like, Darian, you're dead weight. We had 10 meetings and you made it to one of them, right? That's what we want to avoid. We want a clear basis for objective accountability. I will attend 75% of quarterly meetings. Great. Did you do it or not? There shouldn't be a debate. We can talk about whether or not that's a problem and was this a one-off because you changed jobs or what have you? Or is this going to be an ongoing issue because you changed jobs, in which case maybe we look at a different role for you. But there shouldn't be debate over did you check this box or not. And again, remember, just as with all these tools, the implementation of this document has to be board led, especially because this is where we're going to put the pill in the cheese to get the dog to take its medicine from a standpoint of fundraising responsibilities for the board. Right. And, let me say that in general, and again, I can share a template, an example of this with folks. What I like to include out of about a dozen items on this checklist are 3 items for fundraising. I personally am not at all a fan of a combined give or get target for 2 reasons. Number one, when you combine give or get, it's the word or. So if my network gives, if my company gives, or whatever, that should absolutely never let me off the hook from making a personal contribution every year. And the way that I frame this to the board so it makes sense to them is less, we need the money or this is helpful, and more catalytic, more from a standpoint of as we enter this next chapter of our development, we will increasingly get asked as we go after the bigger dollars, what percentage of your board gives, especially from institutional funders. And if we ever say less than 100%, we're not getting that grant. So it is critical that we can say 100% of our board gives every year. You could give $1 or $5. That's not what's important, but everybody has to give every year. So, that is catalytic in terms of unlocking other support. But the other thing here is that if we set a target, even if we separate give or get and we say everybody's got to give 5 grand, well, that undermines diversity. And especially if we want to recognize the value of lived experience and bring, we're a homeless services organization. Maybe we want someone on the board that is currently or previously homeless so that we're not in an ivory tower and we really understand that perspective at the senior leadership level. Great. Well, that person might have a hard time, donating 5 grand, whereas the partner in the law firm could add a couple zeros to that number without batting an eye, but she feels like, oh, because she made it 10 grand and doubled the number, she's off the hook. No, the language I like to use for what would traditionally be the give is requiring a personal capacity gift every year. And that is defined as the largest gift you can comfortably make, totally subjective, and it's up for you to decide, what's that number. But it's also defined as one of your top 3 philanthropic investments of the year. If you're giving more money to 10 other groups, maybe you should join their board. And if your board is sort of really active and engaged with lots of other causes, maybe you move that number up to top 5 investments, top 7. I do really like having a number so it's more objective and clear and black and white, but that's the give piece. The get piece, once again, setting a number undermines diversity for the same reasons. So I like to just say the expectation is everybody will open up their Rolodex and pick a number, 3 introductions a year, 5 introductions a year to potential supporters, which could be donors, funders, it could be other board members, it could be in-kind providers. Instead of spending 50 grand on plumbing, you get someone to do it for free or for cheap, and that also helps the bottom line. Right. So, and it's incumbent upon the organization, and I like to be explicit about this, to say on a quarterly basis, we're going to talk about what our needs are to help you help us. Oh, I know somebody that you should talk to about that upcoming gala or about the grant to support this new program. Right. So that's the get piece. And then I like to have a third item on the fundraising section, which just says, I understand and recognize that fundraising is a core responsibility of each and every board member, and that I will find some way to support it. Could be writing those handwritten letters or the thankathon or hosting a house party or going on lunches and, maybe and this is where I explicitly say, if I'm not comfortable asking for money, I won't be forced to do so. But maybe I come on the pitch and I just talk about my personal involvement and why I'm passionate about the work, but I leave the ask to you. No problem. So those are kind of the 3 elements of fundraising that I like to, make it explicit vis-a-vis a board member agreement. This is usually one of the biggest ones when it comes to getting folks involved with fundraising. So I'm actually going to pause here for a second, see if Jay or any of the readers had, any of the listeners had any questions or comments on this.
We do. Heather had written this great question. How do you handle board members who say they have a conflict of interest for the introductions? And in Heather's case, working in finance, where everyone, or this is a quote actually, I work in finance and everyone I could introduce you to is a potential client.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that this could be, well, so first of all, I think it helps to talk about more than just donation prospects. It could be board prospects or in-kind prospects. So you're giving people sort of some other options. But ultimately, if they genuinely cannot ever open up any doors and are sort of banned from doing so, that person is probably not that well suited to being a board member. Or if that is the case for many of your directors, then I would strip this item out of the board member agreement because the whole point is this document should be that uniformly applied lowest common denominator, and you don't want to make exceptions. You don't want to say everybody's expected to make 3 intros a year, but oh, Dora, you have those conflicts, so don't worry about item 7. No, either it's in the document and everybody does it, or it's not. But what's in the document can be worded in such a way that everyone feels comfortable. And maybe we change the number, maybe we include different types of supporters, strategic partners, or what have you. But if it's in there, it is to be expected of every member. Absolutely.
And that's it for now, Darren.
Okay, great. So let's get into the matrix. This is kind of the final product, just quick example to illustrate it. But ultimately, the idea is you want to be able to take stock, right? And the first step is looking on the left side here at these different characteristics. And so the first step in creating a tool that will guide an intentional approach to recruitment, a proactive approach to both recruitment and board refinement is what do we need collectively across all directors and board members over the next decade or so? Like, or to put it another way, it would be impossible for us to fulfill our potential as an organization if over the next decade we did not have at least one board member who brought blank to the table, right? Not it would be helpful or it would be nice to have, it would be impossible for us to fulfill our potential unless we have each and every one of these. What is each and every one of those characteristics? That's a conversation that you want to have with the board. And I like to group it into 3 buckets or dimensions to guide that thinking. The biggest one tends to be expertise and capacity. We want different subject matter expertise. We work in climate change, so we want environmental and sustainability. We work specifically on women on the front lines, so we want women's leadership. We need some functional expertise around, marketing and PR or nonprofit fundraising and governance or legal and accounting support, whatever it might be. So most of this bucket tends to be filled with sort of the expertise side of things. The capacity is usually time and money. We want, one of the things the agreement will say is everybody's putting in at least 5 hours a month, 3 hours a month, whatever the number is. Well, it might be nice to have a few board members who can put in 10 hours a month and play leadership roles. And it's usually helpful to have, at least some board members who are high net worth and can write a big check if they're so inclined, right? Expertise and capacity. Connections, what kind of relationships do we need direct access to where somebody on the board can pick up the phone and call, the press, influencers, different types of funding sources like foundations, corporate, government agencies, research partners in academia, whatever it might be that's critical for us. Again, not nice to have, but must have. And then finally, diversity, which is not just about racial and ethnic diversity. It's really about representing the community that you serve. We're a youth services organization. Well, maybe we should have someone under the age of 30 on the board. We have, we're a national organization with a strong presence in California and New York. Well, let's talk about geographic diversity and wanting to have some directors in both of those locations, as well as in Chicago, where we're planning to expand and we do a lot of fundraising work there. gender balance, LGBT representation, what have you. And this is where lived experience would also reside. So, we want someone with lived poverty experience, with, experience with the prison system, or with foster youth system, whatever it might be. That's where that lived experience would be reflected. And so the point is, the first conversation with the board is, what should we be measuring? What are those characteristics that are the must-haves? And then once you've filled that in, once you've filled out those three buckets, as you can see here, I mean, it's like a 5-minute process for each board member to just go down their column with their name at the top of it and just sort of check the relevant boxes by putting a 1. And now instantly we can see the totals, and now we know where we're heavy and where we're light. And that then guides the discussion where the board says, okay, based on those tallies and based on what we know are our key priorities and goals over the short term, over the next 1 to 2 years, now let's talk about what do we really need to focus on right now in terms of recruitment. And the output of that conversation, usually ultimately culminating in an informal vote, is we're looking for that African American, person with nonprofit fundraising experience and connections into the corporate social responsibility community, or whatever it might be. Right? Looks like a few questions have come through. So let me pause there and see if there's any questions around that.
Yes, and I just was taking a look. That couple came through the host channel, so I wanted to make sure I understood them. And we have one which is just asking if you are able to share some of these templates. Darian, is that something that you're willing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, you've got my email, and I'll have it at the end slide as well. And if anybody wants to contact me, I'm happy to share those for free, and also happy to offer up calls with anyone that wants to chat about it.
Terrific.
Yeah.
And we'll also make sure we put that in chat as well and read it out loud. So for those who are enjoying the recording, you'll have a way to reach out and make contact with Darian as well. And then we had a question about who should design the board member agreement.
Yeah, so this is where, essentially there's a little bit of a threading of the needle here, because ultimately, as I've shared, all of these tools must be board led in terms of their adoption and implementation. And so the board has to have a sense that they are in control and they are in the driver's seat. And at the same time, my tribe are the nonprofit leaders that are doing this work day by day on the front lines. And so, the way that I have found the best results is to essentially give them the opportunity to put their thumb on the scale. And what that looks like is starting with that broader philosophical conversation with the board, through the board champion, saying, thank you for your leadership. We're at this exciting point. Does it make sense to, dial in the highest and the best purpose of the board, make better use of your time, clarify roles and responsibilities, etc.? Yes, great. Do these tools sound helpful? Yes, great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, because I was hoping that might be the case. And just to make the best use of your time and to streamline the conversation, instead of you starting with an empty canvas and a blue sky, I've taken the liberty of working with staff and a select few board members to just take a stab at an initial draft of this. And we've customized Darian's templates just to seed the conversation. We're not expecting you to sign this as is. We're not mandating this, implemented, in a current format, but we're just really focused on making the best use of your time. And when you frame it that way, the board is very receptive and they feel like you're being respectful of their time. And ultimately, they might change some things here or there, add some things in, take some things out, or reword some things. But typically, what you wind up with that gets approved is 95% of what you started to begin with. So it gives you the ability to make sure the things you need are in there, and yet the board still has that sense of control. All right, let's move into the third tool, which is the consent calendar, consent agenda. Like I said, this is sort of my favorite and by far the most transformational tool that I've used personally as an ED, as a board chair, board member, and as a consultant across hundreds of organizations. And again, the pain point that this addresses is, in short, most board meetings are a horrible waste of time. And specifically, they're a horrible waste of time because we, recruit this incredible, high-powered, well-connected group of leaders with all this strategic insight to lend. We recruit them into the board, and then the only thing we do when we come together as a group is we talk at them and give them all these FYIs and updates. And then they go home after asking some clarifying questions. And again, the mission has not moved forward. We are not any better off than we were before the meeting, with the exception of now there's a few people up to speed on various aspects of the organization so that arguably they're able to perform their fiduciary responsibilities. Horrible waste of time. It is absolutely critical that the board is up to speed on all aspects of the operation. But the question is, if you ever saw the movie The Matrix and you remember the scene where Neo learns Kung Fu in like 5 seconds, how do we give your board their, board Kung Fu in the first 5 minutes of the board meeting so that they're still able to get all those FYIs and updates? All those items that would have been on your agenda that have the word report or update are still conveyed. They're just conveyed in sort of that like Matrix Kung Fu style approach. And there's a really straightforward answer to this, which is a 3-part tool that you would distribute before the board meeting. And it's basically taking your minutes, but tweaking it in a couple different ways. So what that 3-part tool is going to look like is the first piece, and this is the one that requires the most board input, is an organizational dashboard. Just like you sit down in your car, and as soon as you turn it on, you're looking at a dozen or so, maybe fewer metrics and key performance indicators, and they're all green, yellow, or red. And if everything's blinking green, okay, steady as she goes, you're doing great. And just to be clear, we're not only talking about operational and financial metrics, we're mission-led organizations. So we also need metrics. These are actually the most important ones that are gauging our progress, our programmatic impact. Are we moving our mission forward or not? Right. And so, we've got these different metrics, and we're able to just really quickly at a glance see how we doing. How we doing operationally, how we doing in terms of our impact. Great. That is like the 30,000-foot view. It takes you 10 seconds to get to grok. And now we get into the meat of the sandwich. This is where everything that would have been on your agenda with the word report or update, instead of it being on your agenda and instead of you spending hours developing those PowerPoints, put it into writing. This is when I talk about your sort of board meeting dossier, because you're treating the board like heads of state. Give them really, really quick, no more than 2-paragraph updates each. Give me the fundraising update, the facilities update, the program 1 update, program 2 update, board recruitment update, whatever, like any updates and reports that you want to share, put them into writing, keep them to 2 paragraphs. If there's anything blinking red on the dashboard, it has to be spelled out here. Otherwise, let them know, what you want to tell them and why it's relevant, what they need to know about it. We thought we would be at this place with our fundraising. We're actually at this place, and here's the significance of that. This is what we're doing about it. So it's not just the what, it's the so what, right? And then finally, after they get through the dashboard, which takes them a sec, the executive summaries, which takes, a few pages. Now, finally, we have the minutes from the previous meeting. However, instead of 10 pages, he said, she said, what time we adjourned, all those details, if there's a lawyer on the board that, requires that you're keeping those minutes, great. Put them in Dropbox, archive them somewhere. Nobody's going to look at them. What's really helpful from more of a management tool standpoint is minutes that are kept to 2 to 3 pages, and they only really are used to convey 3 and only 3 things. Number 1, any key takeaways or insights, right? We had a conversation about this topic, and here's where we sort of roughly landed, or some of the big ideas that came out of it. Number 2, any votes that were taken, just bold and italicize them so they jump off the page. And most importantly, are any commitments or action items that were shared, with a key so that each person or group that made any kind of commitment gets a different highlighter color. So I, Darian, committed to, calling up 3 donors by the end, and ideally there's a deadline for each of these. I committed to calling up 3 donors by the end of the week to invite them to next week's gala. That's highlighted in red. I'm also a member of the finance committee, and we agreed by the end of the month to send out the updated P&L, highlighted in green. And I'm a member of the board as a whole, and all the board members agreed that by the end of the year, we would complete the annual survey and get that over to us. Great, highlighted in purple. And now there's a little key up top, so I know I only need to read the things that correspond to me as an individual, as a member of Committee X, and as a member of the board, right? Super, super helpful. And the idea is, so now this is that Matrix Kung Fu packet, this 3-part tool that's going to replace all those FYIs and updates in your agenda. And the idea is you distribute this about a week in advance before the board meeting, ideally, along with the agenda for the meeting. The three of these documents are integrated as one PDF, so it's one attachment and only one. And then the idea, that's key here is you don't expect everybody to do their homework. Either they didn't read it, or if they did, they don't remember it. And so, as funny as this sounds, you're going to start your meeting out in silence as you hand out the hard copy or invite everybody to bring up the PDF if you're in Zoom, and you sit there in silence for 6, 7 minutes as everybody reads or hopefully rereads this packet, right? And when the board chair or whoever's chairing the meeting sees all the heads go up, great, everybody done reading. Oh, okay, one more person will give you 30 more seconds. Okay, great, we're wrapping up. Any clarifying questions? Right? Clarifying questions are questions that typically take the ED, who answers 90% of the questions asked, less than a minute to answer. If there's anything really meaty, oh, I see that we're not going to make payroll this week and we're out of money. That's not a clarifying question. That's a pretty significant and strategic discussion. If there's anything that's beyond a minute or 45 seconds to answer, the chair gets to decide what to do with it. We're going to put this on the meeting agenda. We're going to put it on the next agenda. We're going to send it to committee or staff. Whatever it is, like find a parking lot and an outlet for it and essentially take it out of that three-part sandwich so that the three-part sandwich, just like your minutes, typically can get approved. And once that approval happens, now that's when the matrix kung fu is complete. And now we've got 95% of our board meeting to talk about whatever you don't know the answers to. Fundraising brainstorm. How are we going to, resource this new program we're launching? We have an opportunity to go left or right. Do we want to buy the building? Do we want to stay in our current space? Whatever it might be. And that's the juice. And when the board gets to contribute on those strategic discussions and dialogues, guess what? It naturally translates to them having a deeper sense of ownership over the work, which organically translates into expanded fundraising engagement and personal generosity. So that's ultimately where the consent agenda and consent calendar comes into play. Really briefly, just to showcase, a couple quick examples of what a dashboard can look like. Again, we're dealing with both finances and operations as well as programs. You've got these three colors of indicators. Are we comfortable? Are we sort of, potentially at risk, or are we definitely red flag area? And those red flags being fleshed out in the executive summaries. At a glance, this is what it's going to look like. But if you kind of zoom in, what you'll see is for any of the buckets, finances, fundraising, programmatic impact, you've got, a handful of metrics, usually about a dozen total across all the different aspects. And for each of those, we have an annual target. Maybe the board set it, maybe the executive director just decided on it, but we're being transparent about what that annual target is. But the key point here is reporting against an annual target is not that useful. We're at 13% of our goal for the year. Okay, great. Is that good or bad? I have no way of knowing. What's really critical is for each of those annual targets, typically the staff would translate each of those into a month by month or a quarter by quarter target so that at any point in time, whenever you're having a board meeting, we know where we're supposed to be at this moment in time. As of January 31st, we were meant to be here and we were actually here. And that delta between year to date, target versus actual, that is really where the key insights come from. Usually there's some kind of, archival, like, well, where were we at last time or where were we at this time last year? And then there's a couple fields that you'll sort of hide over time. But when you first introduce the dashboard, you want to let people know what is the very basic algorithm of what are the ratios that are green versus yellow versus red, typically comparing YTD actual to target. And in a sentence or less, what are we measuring and how are we measuring it? Again, you'll probably hide those after the first time you introduce this. But in an ideal world, the board is approving the consent agenda as a standing first order of business. You're spending about 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of your meeting, going through the packet, answering those clarifying questions, and now we're moving in to the big discussions. And let me briefly just say that especially, I'm writing a book on AI for nonprofits right now. One of the things that's really interesting is sort of second generation dashboards, where instead of just measuring one metric, our strategic plan says that we have 4 pillars of our work: health and well-being, economic development, educational access, and community engagement. For each of those, we're creating an algorithm where there are actually 5 or 6 metrics that are weighted that go into that overall, pillar score, if you will. And we're using AI to sort of automatically calculate that and generate this in real time. Super, super valuable, a little bit more involved. Happy to talk to folks about that if it's of interest. And that's pretty much it, for my time today. Again, you've got my mobile phone and my email on the screen here. So if people want any or all of these templates, if you're interested in a 15 or 20-minute chat to talk about your needs and challenges, and I can connect you to other resources or providers, this is my work in the world is helping people help. And so really excited to be with all of you. And I hope you're leaving not only inspired, but inspired to action. Jay?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this, Darian. Really great and so targeted and specific, as well as wonderful, wonderful examples. And clearly people are enjoying it. So thank you all for commenting in the chat about that. I know that he appreciates that this has been valuable for you. Please do take down Darian's information. I know you can find his work also. He alluded to it. His books are out there and available, as well as the one that's coming at the end of this year. So be on the lookout for that. And you can find him also right there on LinkedIn. I hope you'll take a look for that and follow his various activities and his comments. Are you speaking anywhere soon, Darian, where people can be on the lookout for you?
I'm going to be the closing keynote at the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance conference, the Elevate conference that's coming up pretty soon. I think that's the only one that's sort of on the immediate horizon. But I'm, starting to do a lot more in the space and a lot more public speaking just because of the new book and stuff. And
Sure.
so, yeah, so I hope to hear from your community. And I think just in closing, I want to thank everybody, not only on behalf of myself and on behalf of Jay and the team DonorSearch, but I really want to thank you on behalf of the thousands, if not millions, of people that you collectively serve. I really hope today was helpful for you, and I look forward to hearing from you if I can ever be of service.
And thank you again, Darian, for everything you do, as well as for sharing today. And I also want to thank everybody in the room for hanging out with us today. We know you are busy, but I know you benefited from this as well. I hope you'll be joining us again on Thursday when we have another great session coming up. And if you want to know more about that, as well as the rest of the calendar, you can find all that over at the DonorSearch site, donorsearch.net under the resources tab, or by being on their list. And then you'll get mailed announcements about all of the various programs coming up. Also, you will be receiving an email with a link to this recording. So you can share this with people in your organization, perhaps other friends and colleagues in the field who probably need a little encouragement about how to make sure their board members can really be the best that they can be. So please be on the watch for that email. And with that, you're also going to see a little information at the end here. So maybe pull out your cameras for a little QR code and take a picture of that to learn more about our sponsor. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Thanks, Darian.
Thank you.